Hi, welcome to this event. This is really quite a special event, I know, amongst many events, but this has been co-hosted by Canada and the UK. And what I'd like to do is actually pass it over to Catherine Stewart, Canada's Climate Change Ambassador, to give you proper welcoming remarks, and then Catherine will pass it over to our panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Katie. It's great to be here, and want to welcome everybody on behalf of the Government of Canada and the UK. We're very delighted to be able to host this space for a good conversation on carbon price certainty and international alignment. Canada and the UK are both very strong supporters for carbon pricing. In fact, just this past week, Prime Minister of the UK wrote to my Prime Minister Trudeau to indicate they will be joining the Global Carbon Pricing Challenge. So we're very delighted about that, and I'll speak about that in a minute. But it just goes to show you how committed our two countries are to carbon pricing. And we both support the World Bank's Partnering for Market Implementation, which helps countries design, pilot, and implement different pricing instruments aligned with development priorities. So carbon pricing is very uniquely flexible, and it relies on the power of markets to find the lowest cost ways of reducing emissions. You might say that carbon pricing adjusts the rules of the game, but it doesn't dictate how best to play it. By pricing emissions, governments are aiming to influence investors and industries, nudging them to invest in cleaner technologies, and I'd like to think it's actually making a difference on the ground. But to have the biggest impact, the rules must be clear, they must be consistent, and they must be broadly applied. We know that investors like certainty. Not knowing it's one thing to know what the price is today, but important to also know what the price is in the future. So this can be a very challenging thing to guarantee, as market prices fluctuate and evolve over time. As you may know, carbon pricing is very central to Canada's climate plan, and some industries remain hesitant to invest because of the uncertainty. So that's why we are exploring ways to increase certainty. And just this past month, or a couple of weeks ago, I've lost track of time, the government introduced its fall economic statement, and with that announced the introduction of a carbon contracts for difference as part of Canada's growth fund. And these are the kind of financial tools that are needed to help improve the certainty that I'm talking about. Broad application of carbon pricing and consistency across systems is crucial. If we have an uneven patchwork of carbon pricing systems, we run the risk of carbon leakage. And that undermines our ability undermines the objective of reducing global emissions. So I mentioned the Global Carbon Pricing Challenge, and 2 days ago, Canada and Chile hosted a session together of carbon pricing champions to take stock of how we're doing with global coverage of carbon pricing. And for those of you who were at COP26, Prime Minister Trudeau was joined by carbon pricing leaders from around the world, including the private sector, to launch this global pricing challenge, whereby 20% of the world is currently covered under some type of carbon pricing regime, 20% of emissions. We want to bring that up to 60% by 2030, so 3 times. And we're very pleased, as I said, that the UK has joined in this partnership. So today on this panel, we want to delve into these topics of price certainty and consistency and ask how we can more effectively work together as a global community to expand and align carbon pricing systems and to provide the certainty that's needed to drive the energy transition and realize a net zero future, while ensuring, of course, a just and equitable transition. So I will now turn it back over to Katie Sullivan. For those of you who haven't met her, she's not new to the COP scene and a real advocate and champion of global carbon pricing and carbon market trading. She is the managing director for IETA, the International Emission Trading Association. Back over to you, Katie. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Great remarks, and yes, congratulations on the carbon pricing challenge and those that are supporting, including the UK now. It feels like many weeks ago that was launched. It was only a few days ago now. So I am honored to be here to moderate this session where we do not have much time and we have quite a bit to cover. We want to hear different insights from government, UK, Vietnam, think tank, IMF, about this challenge but also opportunity when it comes to defragmentation or ensuring consistency across these carbon pricing systems of all shapes and allowing for some kind of comparability across these. And certainly from my perch with businesses that are looking to invest or having to comply, including across jurisdictions, multi-jurisdictions, they want, as you say, the certainty, the clarity, and hopefully that ultimate fungibility across some of these systems that are mature or that are becoming more mature by the week, it seems. So with that, I would like to invite, actually, I would like to introduce the co-host. We have Kate Hughes, Director for International Net Zero, Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy base at Government of UK. We have Heiner van Lupke, Senior Researcher at DIW Berlin, the German Institute for Economic Research. We have Thanh Quang Yoon, Department of Climate Change, Government of Vietnam, and we have Simon Black, economist at the IMF. So we are structuring this into two parts. The first part will focus on the international cooperation and need for establishing a strong framework. Second part, we'll dig more into long-term price certainty to support investment. All right? So we have to keep it tight because of, again, timing. But let's first start with Kate, around how should we think about coverage and alignment across carbon pricing systems, just broadly, or how you and the UK and your constituents are thinking about it right now.
Great. Well, thank you very much, and welcome to the UK Pavilion as well. It's great to have you all here and for this conversation. And I think great to do this on Solutions Day, because I think one of the key elements about carbon pricing is that it is going to be, and already is, a massive part of the solution to how we get to 1.5 degrees. And we won't get to 1.5 degrees unless we are valuing and factoring in carbon pricing, of setting those caps and using these systems and the markets, and then making sure that actually we are all aligned and cooperating as part of those markets as well. So it's critical to delivering on the Paris Agreement, to keeping 1.5 alive, and also for achieving, the science is really clear on this from, IPCC, OECD, and everyone is very clear on the role of carbon pricing here. But as we just heard, only a fifth of emissions are currently captured by carbon pricing, and we know that isn't enough, so we know we need to do more, and that part of coverage and alignment and cooperation is absolutely critical. So it is great that Canada have just launched the Global Carbon Pricing Challenge to enable us to have that dialogue, the cooperation, sharing best practice, because it can be quite daunting as well when you're trying to think about what does a carbon pricing mechanism look like. So it's really critical to work together. So we are a very strong supporter of carbon pricing through our own domestic action, but also we are supporting other countries and supporting the uptake internationally as well. So domestically, our UK Emissions Trading Scheme, ETS, demonstrates our own commitment to this as a way to drive ambition and to set those signals and targets, and doing this in the most cost-effective way that we can with businesses as well. We are aligning our emissions trading scheme cap to be net zero consistent, and we'll be doing that from 2024, and again sending those signals to the markets to making sure that we've got that alignment within our system, and we would encourage others to do the same as well. As the Ambassador said, we're supporting the Partnership for Market Implementation, and very happy to be doing that with our friends in Canada as well. And that's looking to expand the number, the depth, the breadth of carbon pricing systems in other countries as well. So very much about learning from each other, having these conversations and making sure that as we expand the coverage and aligning what we're doing, that we can work collectively with many others. Thanks.
Very much, Kate. I've chosen to take the podium so Simon could have the mic. So let's actually go to the Vietnam perspective and just your perspective around the coverage alignment across carbon pricing systems, how to think about it, also some of the maybe barriers that you're facing.
Thank you. Thank you for the UK for the invitations, and thank you for your kind introductions. I think let me quickly recap on what happens in Vietnam at the moment. So we plan to have the emission trading scheme and also the creating mechanism to have it piloted by 2025. And also we plan to have it linked with the international system by after 2030. So definitely the alignment of the carbon pricing over the world is a key important aspect for us. So let me quickly talk about the challenge at the moment. So we identify 3 key challenges for implementing the ETS and also for the linking the system. The first one is the governance. We have to find a way to manage the ETS, to operate the ETS, and also how to adjust the aspect and the design of the ETS so that we can link the system together. And the second is the flexibility. So we must find the system to have the flexible, to have it be able to adjust it, and also to be able to link with other system. And also the last but not least is the transparency. So we must have the price transparent because we want to bring the benefit to the one who might get the most, to be able to have the price hikes for the one who reduce the most greenhouse gases. So that's why to be able to link the system and also to have the whole coverage of the economy, then we must address the challenges. Thank you.
That's great, and congratulations about the recent announcement. So that's the Vietnam emissions trading system, pilot initially 2025, right? And then, if we could go to DIW, hi, and Heiner, in even just the broader sense, and I mean, you have spent a lot of time and dedicated a lot of research hours to thinking about carbon pricing systems and trying to allow for at least alignment or coverage and why there's this pursuit on that. Maybe if you want to tell the audience how you and I guess a number of your readers and stakeholders who are recipients of this information, how it is helping them move forward in thinking through the benefits or approaches to consistency and alignment across carbon pricing systems. Thanks.
Well, first, thanks very much for the invitation and to participate in this panel. My perspective is indeed coming from years of working internationally. I spent 7 years in Indonesia working for the Indonesian government actually as a policy advisor. So I witnessed the genesis of this emission trading system in Indonesia. And I think a couple of things are worthwhile mentioning there. If you're working across jurisdiction, meaning if you're working internationally and you are thinking about how to support these initiatives, and I think then it's important to realize that emerging economies, developing countries, thinking about climate policy, they have obviously to develop the development objectives and climate objectives to balance, so thinking about the industry as a backbone for growth, for producing products, for trade, etc. That's important, as well as the climate objectives. So I think a policy mix is then what is needed. If you introduce carbon pricing, you also have to think about how to support industries in enabling to cover investment costs. So my proposal then would be to think about a little bit outside the box, thinking about how experience gathered in the context of carbon contracts for differences could be then applied in situations where you have emerging ETS schemes, and how this could be coupled, how this could be designed in phases. And I think that's new exciting work areas. That's why I'm also very happy that I'm sitting next to my Vietnamese colleague. And yeah, these are the issues that I see on the horizon now coming up that work towards alignment, balancing development and climate on the level of these concrete instruments. And thank you.
Okay, that's great. And we'll dig a bit deeper into some of these mechanisms like the CCFD in a moment. But Simon, you have been in this space for a while and tracking the explosion of carbon pricing developments at all stages, phases, shades, right, around the world. So I guess first off, before we dig deeper into some other work that you've prepared recently, how pricing can actually support the fairness and a just transition, and really how that can play a role, and we can lean in more heavily, and why the carbon pricing challenge and all of this international cooperative initiatives that are occurring right now are critical vehicles in supporting that journey.
Yeah, and is this working? Yeah, thanks so much, everybody, and thank you for UK and Canada for the invitation to the event. I think our view at the fund is that carbon pricing is the sort of central pillar around which mitigation strategy should be designed, and there's a huge amount of excitement around carbon pricing that's been accelerated over recent years. So we now have about 20% coverage, more or less, of emissions by carbon pricing schemes, but that's increased from about 9% from about 5 or 6 years ago. So it really has accelerated globally. In the fund, one thing that we're trying to promote is this idea of an international carbon price floor. So we know that the current NDCs are not going to get us to 2C, and let alone 1.5C. And additionally, we know that we're not going to get to 2C if we only cover 20% of emissions. So things like the challenge are fantastic initiatives, but ideally what we need is an agreement amongst major emitting countries to price their emissions in a way that's Paris aligned, essentially. So we've come up with this international carbon price floor agreement idea, where if you capture, say India, China, US, EU, then you already have 2/3 of global emissions right there. And ideally, they would agree to price their emissions, but do so in a way that's equitable. You mentioned just transition, and this is a really, really important issue. From an economist perspective, the ideal is to have the same carbon price everywhere, right? But that would be quite bad for, well, that's only acceptable if you have a huge amount of transfers globally, which might not be politically achievable. So as a result, we've suggested differentiated carbon pricing. So in the agreement that I mentioned, you would have, say, India agreeing to price emissions at $25, developed countries to do it $75, and then middle-income countries like China, $50. And we think that, accompanied by financial transfers and possibly also technology transfers, can ensure that this is a just and equitable agreement, and really makes the benefits of carbon pricing accelerate the transition. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you, Simon. And we had the ambassador earlier mention the Canadian context. And that's, well, where I'm from, and we've certainly been living in the trenches on a whole host of different carbon pricing systems that have cropped up over the years, subnationally. And recently-ish, the federal government, now it sets a national stringency standard to provide consistency across and comparability across these systems, these subnational systems, so there is more alignment, they stitch up, and there's comparability. Do you think that this could have any value as a possible model to any of the work regions, countries that you're working in now, industries? Oh, I'm asking, yeah, sorry. Well, who would like, go on, Heiner.
So the experience that I gathered are mostly in the Asian region, as I mentioned, Indonesia, and I think it's important to recognize there that, I think an alignment of carbon pricing has to follow steps then, and from the perspective of policymakers in that region, I think one would start from a level that is acceptable for the industry, and where you get the buy-in from the industry, because It's not a top-down ordered instrument, but it needs to cooperate with the industry. So now I think that it's important to offer a policy mix where you also, from the international community point of view, you could offer instruments that help the industry then to invest. And what I'm advocating for is the instrument of carbon contracts for differences, because that might be a novel instrument then to take the steps on this ladder towards carbon pricing. You have to see how phase-in of an ETS and how it relates then to such instruments that foster investments in the industry, how that could be phased, how that could be planned and programmed. So what I mean is that you could combine instruments such as loans for the CapEx, while you have risk-covering instruments such as the CCFD, targeting more the OPEX that you would have higher if you are introducing such policies, so towards decarbonization. So that's important to keep in mind what's happening in the industry when you talk about taking these steps towards higher carbon pricing, adjusting the caps on a aligned level.
Okay, thanks. And yeah, there are certainly some models, lessons learned, experiences coming out of the Canadian context, and that was also the subnational and the national engagement in bringing together these carbon pricing systems that could align. Kate, I'll go back to you, but if you could tell us about the Breakthrough Agenda, and launched at the World Leaders Summit and the 2030 goal. What role do you see the carbon pricing piece playing in that agenda and the goals?
A whole raft of microphones being passed my way, and thank you. So I mean, for people who might not have heard yet, I hope not, about the Breakthrough Agenda, this was something which we launched last year at COP26, and the idea is that we look at different sectors collectively, globally, and 45 world leaders signed up to the Breakthrough Agenda at COP26 last year, with the idea that if we work collaboratively to speed up, accelerate the transition across energy, road transport, hydrogen, steel, agriculture, and now other sectors as well. This morning in the French were talking about a buildings breakthrough as well, that we can make the transition faster, cheaper, more accessible for everyone as well. And it's another sort of point about collaboration and partnership. And I think it's useful to bring it up here because it kind of comes back to these themes about how can we work with these high emitting sectors? What does that mean? What does that certainty look like? What does the policy landscape look like? And I think carbon pricing only works when it's part of that broader policy package with clear signals to markets from governments in terms of the direction we're heading in, of the speed of the transition, of the expectations. So for example, what we're expecting industry to be doing and where they need to be moving to and when. That means that you can start to sort of build in the market elements alongside that as well. So we're encouraging countries to set out phase-out dates for fossil fuels and accelerate away from petrol and diesel vehicles as well. So those kinds of elements means that that policy framework is clearer, and countries together are setting common kind of standards and targets as well, which again sort of sets that market framework, which is so important for carbon pricing too, as well as working with industry, businesses and everyone else as well. So it's very much the same partners. So hopefully I think it is very complementary part of the picture, so that we're all facing in the same direction.
Thanks very much, Kate. And let's actually talk, the ambassador mentioned the Partnership for Market Implementation with the World Bank. There are a number of initiatives out there, but Partnership for Market Implementation, which previously was Partnership for Market Readiness, we're still getting used to the switch in the acronym, it has been incredibly valuable to a lot of emerging and developing economies as they're navigating and designing and ultimately executing their carbon pricing systems. So Don, Vietnam, we have Canada, UK as supporters of the PMI, and Vietnam as a recipient of PMI resources. Do you want to share how that has supported, helped now, or what you're expecting them to help or support over the next 3 years?
So definitely, So previously we are recipient of the PMR, the permarket for the readiness. So since 2015, so during the PMR period, so the first thing we identify which carbon pricing instrument we are going to be implemented, and that's the ETS, the emission trading scheme. And then after 2020, we managed to have the mandate for the implementation of the ETS in the law of environmental pollution. So this is one of the key output from the PMR. Just recently, we have our proposal for the PMI accepted. So which is going to happen from now to 2027. And basically it's going to cover the piloting period and all the preparation phase for the implementation of the ETS. And for under the PMI, we are going to basically to have the ETS pilot for the thermal power, for the cement, and also for the steel sector for the ETS, and also for the waste sector for the grading mechanism. However, if you look under the whole picture, there is still a lot of work to do. So in terms of the regulations for the MRV, for other sector, for the expansion of after the piloting phase, and also for the development of the platform, the trading platform, and also in terms of the human resources. So we are definitely looking for other support, other cooperation as well, not in terms of the financial support, but also in terms of other experience, expertise from other international organizations as well. For example, the IETA, also for the ICAP, and also for other countries as well, who definitely have some experience and also who have a long history with the implementation of the ETS. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And you'd brought up ICAP earlier. Again, Canada, the UK, a supporter, do incredible work, International Carbon Action Partnership, and a plug because that brings a lot of governments together, critical exchange of information and resources to support these emerging carbon pricing systems. AIDA has the Business Partnership for Market Implementation that does a similar thing with businesses, though, on the ground. Because without business support, knowledge, capacity building, and buy-in, it's really tough to make these carbon pricing systems stick, right, and thrive. So I think what we'll do is maybe go back to, we touched on the CCFD bit and the carbon price floor. But Simon, based on what you've heard so far, and there has been the recent update publication on CCFD thinking, do you want to provide just maybe also like a 101, just to be very clear about what we're talking about, on the price floors, how that's evolving that concept, and what kind of uptake you're getting on that, including across governments? Thank you.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. So we're getting a lot of interest from a lot of different countries in this initiative. I think the key thing for us is that some countries are not going to be able to do carbon pricing ultimately, right? It's politically challenging to set up and technically challenging to set up ETSs, and some countries just are not going to do that at a national level. And so hence we need to understand what the equivalent measures are of non-pricing policies. And so we're working with the OECD to create models, and we're using our own internal model that we developed with the World Bank called the Climate Policy Assessment Tool to convert non-pricing policies and targets into its carbon pricing equivalents. So that you can compare between countries and say, okay, well, you know, maybe this country is not going to do a $75 carbon price, but they're doing other measures such as regulations or subsidies or fee baits or so on, and they're approximately equivalent. So we're trying to help countries in their discussions on this to basically ensure that it includes countries that cannot, for whatever reason, do carbon pricing.
So just a follow-up to that, if you could elucidate the relationship between the BCA discussions that we're having, border carbon adjustments, or CBAM in Europe context, and the work that you're doing and how that's kind of colliding, or even the discussions around these carbon clubs, right? Climate clubs, as you know, the German G7 presidency is advocating for.
Yeah, I think our view broadly is that countries are very worried about competitiveness.
Yeah.
It's difficult for any single country to go aggressively ahead with carbon pricing when they're concerned about carbon leakage and industries moving across borders. And hence we've seen a big surge in interest around BCAs and the CBAM initiative and so on. Additionally, other measures countries have taken historically have been things like free allocation of permits to affected industries. I think our general view is all of these instruments are potentially valid, but they're not nearly as good as an international carbon price floor agreement. And the reason for that is very simple. The actual emissions in trade globally is very small. It's less than 10% of global emissions. And additionally, what we need is more climate action. We need more mitigation. So the extent to which a country puts a BCA on imports from other countries, that covers the emissions in the imports of traded goods. But the ideal is to agree with those other countries, okay, we'll price our emissions aggressively if you do as well. So that's why we're advocating for a carbon price floor above, say, BCAs or other measures.
Okay. And that's, I think, a natural fit for you, Heiner, to like just follow up, again, the nexus of trade, climate, pricing, border carbon adjustments. And would you like to add any flavor from maybe just even a specific European context or German context?
Yeah, I would like to follow up on something that Simon just mentioned, that there are countries, obviously, who don't introduce yet an ETS, don't have a carbon pricing system. You know, the question is, what kind of incentives do the CBAM represent for these countries to act then? You know, imagine there's an industry in country X that is faced with the CBAM and needs investment then to act. I mean, basically to switch technologies, you know, to switch production processes, etc. So in such a situation, the question is really whether like actually a border tariff would then incentivize these industries to act, or if they would then look for other markets, creating some kind of secondary order leakage. And that's why I would propose to make an offer in combination with the CBAM of a finance instrument that would work with these industries then, and to agree on a common roadmap in dialogue with these countries, you know, to make these steps towards decarbonization, and eventually then talk about carbon pricing instruments. But considering that these transformation processes and sectoral levels, they're naturally complex, it's not only one measure, it's finance needed, political will, stakeholder buy-in from the industry, etc. So all that needs to be, I think, a broader process than maybe best to be addressed in a partnership approach than, you know.
Thank you. And so getting into certainty, just that in the world of greenhouse gas emissions, environmental outcomes matter, right? We want to know, we need to know what the environmental outcomes will be in terms of greenhouse gas reductions on the road to net zero. So certainly from our community with businesses continues to be, hey, cost-effective greenhouse gas emission reductions, the better, provided they're measurable. Price certainty, well, that's not as necessary. How do we know we're going to meet, right, our climate goal, ultimately? So just like with that broader notion of like the price certainty, environmental outcomes certainty, and then the actual just certainty for investors and what's needed for government as well. If you could just provide, you know, your thoughts on like currently the thinking there and like future expectations around this issue, you know, price certainty, environmental outcome certainty, can we do both, right? Are there certain really, really important decarbonization efforts that absolutely require that more certainty, maybe in it through blended mechanisms? Would you like to go, Simon?
Yeah, I could speak to this a bit. So I think one lesson that we've learned over the last sort of couple of decades of trying to do different mitigation policies globally is that you know, the ideal is you have a carbon price and you can choose a cap and trade system, ETS, or a carbon tax. And in one case you're capping the emissions, in the other case you're fixing the emissions, or you're fixing the price, right? I think one thing we've learned is that the price really matters. And not just the actual price level, but the expectation of the future price level. So I'll give you a good example of this. In the EU context, you know, there's the EU ETS, which many countries are members of, but the two countries that decarbonized their power systems more rapidly than any other are actually Denmark and the UK before it left the EU. And the reason is the UK had a carbon price floor, and Denmark had an additional carbon tax on its power system. And so both very, very rapidly reduced coal emissions in their power systems. So I think one lesson we're learning is that it's very, very important to give investors and businesses and households certainty on the future price trajectory. And so hence we recommend that when countries do have ETSs, that they backstop it with a price floor so that at the very least investors know what the minimum
They're
carbon price
clear
will be.
about what that will be. And Kate, for the UK, how have you embraced this or pursuing this around providing price certainty to investors? And with the UK ETS, it hasn't been around that long now, right? Like, let's keep in mind it did delink from the EU emissions trading system all that long ago, and you push forward with your own. So how are you trying to embrace some of these considerations into the UK ETS as it goes forward?
Yes, absolutely, and kind of learning from our experiences with the EU ETS and learning from from other countries as well. So having that the opportunity to do that and looking at both the technical elements of what you need to do as well as the policy elements to make it work. And as Simon's just said, so we're using market stability mechanisms, so we have that smooth, transparent and effective running of the scheme. So we do have in place an auction reserve price to do exactly what Simon's just been talking about. So there's a minimum price for the auction of allowances. So there's that certainty for investors, for markets, for businesses as they're entering into this about what that minimum level is. We've also got a cost containment mechanism which allows intervention in the market if there's kind of sustained elevated prices over a certain amount of time as well, so a bit of protection there as well. And the calendars for the auctions are published well in advance as well, so that people can plan for it and know what's happening, and that provides more transparency and predictability as well over the future auctions, the timing, the volume of what's coming through as well. So I think that aligned, and I kind of have mentioned as well kind of the policy setting too. So the transparency and the predictability also comes from our net zero strategy, so from the really clear government commitment to net zero, to our carbon budgets, to the strategy sitting underneath that sector by sector, so that actually again when we're saying this is when we're going to be phasing out internal combustion engine cars by 2035, the markets know. And that again, the two bits combined, as I've said before, I think are really important to that transparency, predictability and efficient working.
That's great, thank you. And Ton, if we look at Vietnam and some of these key design elements that Kate listed around cost containment, price floor, price ceiling in some cases. So how is Vietnam moving forward? Or you haven't made those decisions yet, is that right?
Yeah. So this is something we definitely have to consider because as Simon mentioned before, the price uncertainty is inevitable for the ETS, right? So definitely we're looking toward several options to implement during our design. So one of the keys is for the stability reserve in case of the UK as well for the EU. And also we are looking into the price floor and the price ceiling. However, I do want to stress that one of the key aspects to manage the price uncertainty the information circulations for all the stakeholders involved in the process, and also to provide them with a long-term strategy and long-term visions on what's going to happen in the future. As Katie mentioned before, so Vietnam is definitely going to have the net zero target by 2050, and also we have a long-term strategies on the greenhouse gas emission reductions, and also we are going to have several key documents signed in terms of the energy transition with the UK as well. So all this coming together, so we are going to definitely have to go to have a consultation with different stakeholders and to provide them with information to make it transparent for all the participants in the market to be able to reduce the price volatility.
And what is the level right now of business engagement and support or not, domestically or even internationally, just with some trade partners on this?
At the moment, I think from what we learned from the business sector, that they are definitely very interested in the ETS, because this is a new opportunity for them to have more profit, and also to be able to reward for their previous effort in mitigating those greenhouse gas emissions. So definitely there are some very strong interest from the private sector in Vietnam.
It might not be my final question, but I have one more. Linkage. So in our world, we really like linkage across markets. The more links, the better. Article 6 aligned. And is there any discussion right now about Vietnam as it develops its ETS and who its linkage partners could be, near term, longer term?
For the linkage, we definitely have it in our plan for after 2030. However, which partner and which regions we are going to have it linked is not clear at the moment. However, we are several discussions with other countries in the region, for example, Singapore. Firstly, to link with the voluntary market, to have the liquidity, and also to enhance our NDC, to enhance the implementation of our NDC. So this is the very first key step. So however, we are looking to the future, maybe to link with other countries in the region, in the Asia regions, and maybe with the California, or also with the UK or with the EU ETS. This is something we definitely consider to be done in the future.
We need to talk. There's such an explosion across. We're opening up our AIDA Singapore office in a month, and partially to cater to all of the burgeoning carbon pricing systems in that region, and whether Vietnam, Indonesia, obviously you have Korea, you have Japan, and there's just a whole bunch. So Latin America is very, very similar as well. But Heiner, I wanted to get back to, because we do not have much time left. Are there any questions, by the way, or comments that people are hungry? Okay. The set of risks and incentives for investment in decarbonization, but across different industries. So specific considerations across various industries and types of activity. What are the bigger kind of risks? You can't hear me? When you look at risks and incentives for investment across industries, different industry types, project types, are there specific considerations depending on the industry in which, so some of the work, again, that you've been thinking through to de-risk or complement carbon pricing systems, are there some industry-specific models or insights that you want to share from that work?
I wished I could.
Oh.
That's actually my colleague working in the Institute on these questions. I work on the international cooperation dimension there. And perhaps I can refer to you.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's fine. My apologies. Unless you have some final thoughts to share with the group before we wrap. Heiner?
I'm actually fine with what my statement was about the partnership approaches that I would advocate, which then should contain specific finance instruments as offers across this north-south divide, if you want to call it like that, between countries. And I think it's worthwhile exploring these linkages with ETS systems being phased in by countries, then other support instruments that would cover different types of the industries, such as the OPEX-related instruments, such as CCFDs, and this is also a call for a future agenda of research then in order to make this alignment across countries work better.
Great. Thank you, Heiner. Simon, we'll wrap with you. Well, actually, then we'll bring it to Kate for wrap. But just one thing with Simon and what to watch, again, from your vantage point with the IMF and the OECD through 2023. And what to expect with the price floor work that you have been moving forward with. What should we expect in 2023?
I mean, I hope that we make progress in terms of covering more emissions globally. I think it's great to have initiatives that set an actual target for global emissions. We know we need about a $75 carbon price on average globally to achieve 2C, and significantly more to achieve 1.5. And we also need other policies as well. We're not just speaking about carbon pricing. We need many other things like CFDs and other policies. So I think the thing to watch in coming years is which countries start introducing these systems, and do they buttress them and ensure that they have predictable prices within them. And then finally, we'll see how CBAMs go and where that initiative takes us. It's not just the EU that's going to implement this, it might be other countries as well. So again, and we'll keep making the case for a carbon price floor instead of CBAMs, but we understand why countries would want to do the latter.
Thank you, Simon. So that was a rich discussion. It was a brief discussion, but I think it was a really timely discussion. There's a lot happening right now. So coming together to cooperate on carbon pricing and alignment is more important than ever as we head through 2023 and beyond to reach our targets. Kate, as the co-host of this event with Canada, would you like to share any parting words before we leave?
Well, thank you. And I mean, I think it is genuinely exciting, as you just said. Actually, this is a real moment where people are, I think, understanding the power of this as a solution, and we need to use all the solutions we possibly can if we're going to get to 1.5 degrees. We need to use all of the tools in our toolbox, and this is a really critical one. And I think the thing which has really come through for me today from this session is, number one, you don't have to be called Kate or Katie or Catherine to work on carbon pricing. You can be called all kinds of things to be working on carbon pricing, but I think most importantly it's the partnerships that we've talked about, whether it's the partnerships between different countries, and we've had some great dialogues with Indonesia, and great working with Vietnam, great working with Canada, great learning lessons from each other, and that's how it needs to work as well. But we also need to bring everyone with us on this, so businesses, stakeholders, vulnerable communities. We haven't sort of really touched a little bit on the just nature of all of this, but we need to make sure this works for everyone, and then carbon pricing will be a really successful tool for us. So thank you very much, and I think we're very excited about what the next year and beyond holds, and particularly with new challenges coming through so that we can work together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kate. A round of applause, please, for our panelists. Simon, Kate, Thong, and Heiner. Thank you. And Canada.